Hello, so today I'm going to talk about something that is quite different, really. I'm going to talk about an experience that Neville had. And I only found this out recently by reading an article about him. It was quite interesting. I don't know if you've ever heard of a Kundalini awakening. It's something that is more talked about in sort of Eastern philosophy. But it's about the idea that we have a ball of energy at the base of our spine. And different things can awaken this energy at the base of our spine. And when it's awakened, it almost kind of comes up to the top of our head. And people can have, see lights and things like that. And have almost like a profound spiritual experience. And then after the Kundalini has risen or is opened, many people start to clear out a lot of the blocks that they have in their life. So things come up for them emotionally, psychologically, and sometimes, from what I've heard, you can awaken your Kundalini subconsciously, I guess, without consciously intending to. There's ways that you can do it through meditation consciously, but then there's also other ways of awakening Kundalini, which are almost involuntary. And I want to talk about Neville and his story. And then I actually have a personal story to share myself as well. So in 1960, Neville experienced the opening of his body by a bolt of lightning to reveal a divine luminous fluid within. And he had this profound sort of spiritual experience, I guess. And he talked about it in one of his lectures in 1972. He said, "When man is turned around by a complete splitting of the temple, for the curtain of the temple is torn in two from top to bottom, and at the base of your spine you're going to see a golden, pulsing, liquid light. And as you see it, you're going to know that you are it. You're looking at yourself, and yet it is formless, and you fuse with it, and then you become that fiery serpent, and up you go into the rain, and it vibrates like thunder. Then you are completely turned around. The energies that went down into generation are now turned up into regeneration." So Neville called this the promise. It's the process of self-realization as we kind of understand the power of our imagination. He talks about this in the kind of a concept of birth from above, and it was actually a bit off-putting to some of his followers. He started talking about his experience, his spiritual experience, and he said that he was almost reborn through the skull of his head as a womb opened, so almost like his head was cracking. He had this sort of like spiritual experiences. I guess it's very hard to describe in layman's terms because it is more of an energetic. It's not literally his physical skull, but it's his energy, I suppose. It's an energetic thing, and because we don't really practice it here in the West, we don't have, I guess, the language for it. Apparently, when he spoke about this, there was, 300 people, and then the next night after he told it, there was 30 people, and then after that, there were 12 people, and he kept telling the story. And one of his agents said, "Neville, you've got to stop telling that story or you'll have no audience at all." And then Neville said, "Then I'll tell it to the bare walls." And I can just imagine his voice saying it in that wonderful voice he's got. And yeah, he shared that experience, and he wasn't afraid to share that experience. And I'd not even known, I've kind of heard of Neville's work and been interested in Neville's work for quite a number of years, and I didn't know he had that experience. And it's kind of inspired me to share my experience that I had about 12 years ago now. where I believe I had a similar experience, quite involuntary, when I was at a gig, a rave, the Warehouse Project in Manchester, and I was having a great time. I was in a state of bliss, dancing, really enjoying the moment. The music was just perfection, and I was feeling love because I was with a partner that I really loved, and I experienced quite involuntary a sensation of, it almost felt like an egg cracking on my head, like a weird, at first actually I felt like it was like a lump, like a stone feeling in my stomach, and then it rose up, and then it went to the top of my head, and it almost like burst, like a flower or like an egg cracking sort of thing. And I remember feeling some lights, and I remember my head being pulled back, and I was like, whoa. And I remember turning around to my partner at the time and was like, oh my God. And I had this feeling of complete bliss just wash over me. But this feeling of bliss was coming out the top of my head. And then I continued to have feelings of bliss and pleasure from the top of my head. Like it was coming out the very tip of my skull, for hours after. So even when I remember going back home, and I just remember like my whole body was incredibly sensitive, electric, and Neville talked about like a bolt of lightning or whatever, electricity. It felt like that, like but it was immensely blissful. And then the next day felt normal and went about my life. But looking back at that time, after then, my life, my consciousness did change dramatically after that. It wasn't specifically that day I could pinpoint, but that led on to a series of events where my consciousness, just so much came to light, so much stuff I had to face, things I wasn't prepared to face, so much. It was almost like I sort of unraveled from the inside out, really. And I remember at the time trying to search online for, what is this experience? What the hell happened? And then I read a little bit about it, but to be quite honest, I wasn't sure. I wasn't really sure what had happened. And also, I was a little bit embarrassed to talk about it, because maybe if I talked about it in Asia or something like that, people would be like, oh yeah, it was a Kundalini, or this is the experience you had. But in England, it's not a conversation we have really in day-to-day life. So the Western, Western model of consciousness doesn't really have that frame of reference, and I kind of found it difficult to kind of integrate that. But one thing I definitely have been left with since that is I do feel a lot more sensitive in every way, a lot more sensory, a lot more sensitive to energy, a lot more sensitive to people's emotions, a lot more sensitive to even weather, changes in temperature, noise, music, touch, everything really. Just like all my senses have been heightened, I guess. It's really interesting. I'd love to know what you think of Neville's experience and maybe my own, and have you had any experiences with Kundalini, and how it could potentially transform our consciousness.